I'm Wayne Peacock. I am the team leader of the Peacock Group here in Pensacola, Florida. We're based out of Levin Rinky Realty, and I have a team of 6 agents who work with me. We predominantly focus on VA homes. We work with active duty and we work with veterans. Now, what I'm going to go over today, most of it will pertain to what we're doing here in Florida. However, most states have the same guidelines when it comes to a VA purchase. There are a few states that have some different things, but most will require the same thing. And even if they don't require, some of these tips are good whether you're buying here in Florida or somewhere else. So, well, let's talk about one of the myths I would like to bust. And I hear this all the time, and I talk to my veteran clients and my active duty clients. I often hear, this house won't pass a VA inspection. Now, there's two parts to this. One, almost any house will qualify for VA as long as a seller is willing to make repairs and it has the necessities that the VA requires in order to consider that home safe for you as a veteran to live in. Second, VA inspection. There's no such thing as a VA inspection. You should have a home inspection. It's not required by the VA, but it's definitely something I highly recommend you do. You will, however, have a VA appraisal. Now, the appraiser will come out and they will inspect the home, but not like a home inspector inspects. They're going to look for things like, is this a safe home? Do all the conditions or are all the conditions met that the VA requires? And will this home resell at the same value or higher if you, as the veteran, default on your loan? That's really what the appraiser is there for, to make sure the home is worth what you've agreed to pay for it so that the VA will back the funding. What a lot of people think is the VA is the organization that is funding this, and that's not exactly correct. You don't have to go through a big national lender that has VA or veterans in their title, although there are a lot of them out there, and that's what they specialize in. Many local lenders also provide or have VA loans available in their portfolio. So it's always good to check with your local lenders and do some shopping around in the beginning, because although it's all backed by the VA, every lender is going to have a little bit different requirements as far as credit score, credit history, and what they can and can't offer you. Now, in saying that, you're going to have a VA appraiser no matter who you borrow the money through. And that's going to happen for most lenders. That's going to be an expense that you, as the veteran, have to pay for. So make sure you take note, you write down, and you think about all of your upfront cost. Another myth that I hear often is, I don't have to pay anything to buy a house. Yes and no, right? So although your VA loan is 100% loan to value, which means you can borrow the full purchase price for that home, that is true. You don't have to have a down payment. However, you do have closing cost, you do have inspection cost. All those things are going to be coming out of your pocket. Part two of that is when you negotiate and your realtor helps you do this, you can always try to ask for a certain percentage of the purchase price to be given as concessions from the seller to help offset your closing cost. Now, every realtor does it differently, and I may have some realtors come back at me on this, but I generally negotiate the majority of the closing costs covered by the seller. Now, that's always going to fluctuate depending on what type of market we're in, but I've been working with VA for the last several years, and every time we get those costs rolled into the loan and paid by the seller. There are several ways you can do that. I won't go into that in too much detail here. You can always DM me. I can tell you about it. If you're working with a realtor that's not me or my team, they can help you. I don't ever like to go against what another realtor is doing, but I do want to arm you with the knowledge so you can ask the right questions. Not every agent works a lot with VA, so they're not fully educated, maybe is the right word, on all the things that you can and can't do with VA. But I guarantee you, if you're working with a realtor who is trying their best to help you, they're going to do the research. So definitely ask those questions if you've not already, because even though it's not 100% correct that you can buy a house with no money out of pocket, you can get pretty darn close. And there are a lot of builders that still do what they used to tell us years ago was the VA was a dollar move-in, right? So you could still get that with some builders, and we do it here locally in Pensacola, Florida as well. But that's all in your negotiating, right? You're going to negotiate when you're writing your offer, and I'm going to help you craft that. I work very hard to get my veterans into a home with very little money out of their pocket. Now, most states will require you to pay for your own inspections. However, in real estate, everything's negotiable. In some markets, you are able to get that credit back to you from the seller at the closing table, but generally, you will be paying for those out of pocket. So let's move on into what is required for a VA home, right? So you've started your process, you've gotten your certificate of eligibility through your lender, you know how much you're qualified for, and now you're looking at property. Sometimes you may find a home online that looks beautiful in the photos, and then you get there and maybe the soffit's falling out, maybe the front step is cracked, maybe the driveway doesn't go all the way to the road or something like that. You've all been there, I'm sure. If you've started looking at houses yet, you know that sometimes it doesn't look exactly like it does in the pictures. But there's a reason for that. We want you to come in and see the house. We don't want to show you everything up front, right? But let's say you get there and you start noticing little things. I just had this with a client. Oh, will the VA care about that? So when you go out, of course, take your paper, take a notebook, whatever. I have created a checklist for my clients, and I'm happy to share that with you. You can always drop me an email, a text. You could drop a comment below here and just let me know that you would like a copy of the checklist. I'm happy to give you that. And like I said, most of these things are going to be applicable in most states. Always check with your state. Sometimes it's a little bit different, but not much. Here are some of the big things, and it depends on the area you live in. You may, if you're not here in Florida, you may say, well, duh, that's pretty obvious. That should be included, but not everywhere is it. So one of the first things you want to make sure is the house has a permanent source of heat. This permanent source of heat has to also be thermostat controlled and has to be able to maintain the main areas of the house at 50 degrees or higher. One lender told me 55. So good rule of thumb, 50 degrees and higher has to be on a thermostat. Now, what does that mean? You can't have portable heater. So I don't know if people still use these, but where I grew up, my family used them a lot. My grandma had one in the heating hall, as we called it, a kerosene heater. That does not count because that's removable. Window units that have heat, those do not count because those are removable. Now, a split unit, so the units that are affixed to the wall and wired in and they're vented outside with the compressor, those do count. A wall unit that is gas or electric operated is fine as long as it is controlled by a thermostat. So what that means is you can't just have 2 or 3 dials to turn it on low, medium, or high. You have to have a way to control and say, I want this unit to produce heat at 50 degrees or better and come on and off as it needs to maintain that temperature. So just remember that, because there are a lot of areas I used to sell up in the mountains, and some of those homes just had fireplaces, believe it or not. And a fireplace is a source of heat. However, it's not thermostat controlled. So if you run into a house like that, the best thing to do is get with your lender and say, hey, I really love this house. Here's what it's got and what it doesn't have. And then they can check with their guidelines to see if that'll pass or not. But a general rule of thumb is it's got to have heat that is permanent and controlled by a thermostat. Hey, it's not required. I mean, it should be in Florida, right? But it's not. So just remember that. And everything that's in the house has to be working. So if it's got a stove, refrigerator, they have to work. If it doesn't have a refrigerator, that's okay in most areas because a lot of new builds don't come standard with a refrigerator. But they do need to have a working stove. So really, any of the kitchen appliances have to be working. They don't care about microwaves. Most of the time, microwaves are removable. But here's something I did learn with one of my transactions. There was a microwave that was in one of those inserts, and appraiser said it had to be replaced. So that's where the appraiser comes in. They'll look at things and make sure they're working. And if they know the rules, and if it needs to be working, they will tell you it's got to be working before they'll sign off on the appraisal. And the appraisal is what you need to get notice of value. But we can talk about that on another episode, or whatever we want to call these things, right? So you're going to have to know those things, and it's got to be safe. The structure has to be sturdy. It can't be, one wall falling off. You may laugh at that, but I have shown houses that you get to the back of the house and a wall is falling off. The roof has to be in good working order. The VA is going to look at all your main systems, your roof, your plumbing, your electric, and your HVAC and water heater. They want to make sure all those things are working because, again, you need those things to have a safe environment to live in. It's all about safety. Safety is number one. They want to make sure that you, as the veteran, are safe and secure, and you're not buying a home that you're not going to be able to live in. Now, on that note, a home that you're able to live in. Another myth that I hear a lot is I can only use my VA one time, and after I use it that one time, I can never use it again. That is untrue. You can use it as many times as you like, as long as you've got the benefit, you're in good standing. So it's always good to speak to your lender about it and let them pull your certificate of eligibility and see really what you can't do is buy a home and say you're going to live in it and then not live in it, because that'll get you into trouble and that could cause you to forfeit your benefit. So you don't ever want to do that. That's mortgage fraud. That's a no-no. When in doubt, talk to your lender and they can review all the guidelines for you for the mortgage side of things and make sure you're always in the clear and always doing the right thing. So moving on, a couple of other things. You're going to want to make sure the home is free of leaks, and it has to be free of pests such as termites, wood rot, and wood destroying organisms and molds, things like that. In my state, that is required. I did read online that some states don't require that. However, it's still a good rule of thumb to always get a termite inspection. They're going to check not only for termite, they're going to check for wood rot and wood destroying organisms. Now, here in the state of Florida, we have to have what's called a clear UDO, wood destroying organisms report. That means there are no termites, there's no wood rot, and there's no active mold that's considered a wood destroying organism. So keep that in mind. You always need to budget for a few $1,000s in our area for all these inspections up front. If you remember, I said at the beginning, here in Florida, inspections are the responsibility of the buyer. When you're walking through the home, every little thing you notice, it's not going to matter to the VA. But anything that's considered a safety hazard is going to matter to the VA. So if you have missing wall plates for your outlets and your light switches, that is considered a safety hazard. And the VA appraiser will call that out on his appraisal, and those will be required to be repaired prior to him issuing his appraisal or her appraisal. So those are things to look at. And what I do when I walk through a home with a buyer or client, I let them look at the home. And while they're looking at the home, I'm making my notes in case this is the home they decide they want to make an offer on. I mentioned earlier, I have a checklist I give my clients. If you'd like, just drop checklist in the comments. I'm happy to send you that. Those are just a few of the main things I wanted you to be aware of. That was the purpose of this video, just to kind of bust some of those myths and give you an idea of what you need to be aware of if you're going to use your VA home loan. Please do like, follow, click, subscribe, all those fun things that we love for you to